I understand you'd like me to expand part 1 of the story into a more detailed narrative of about 1,400 words, without headings, using simple English and a natural tone. I'll make it engaging, human-centric, and avoid any content that might violate YouTube policies. I'll also avoid using common names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and Jamal. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Riverside Cafe, casting warm patches of light across the polished wooden floor. It was just past 7, and the small but cozy establishment was beginning its daily routine. The rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filled the air, mixing with the sweet smell of pastries baking in the kitchen. This Tuesday had started like any other, quiet and unhurried, giving the staff time to prepare before the usual rush of customers looking for their morning fix. Among the staff moving about was Michael Hernandez, a young man in his mid-20s, with an infectious smile that seemed to brighten even the dullest corners of the cafe. Michael had Down syndrome, a fact that had never diminished his enthusiasm for life or his dedication to his job. If anything, it had only strengthened his resolve to show everyone just how capable he was. "Good morning, Mrs. Chen," Michael called out cheerfully as he carefully arranged the sugar packets and stirrers at the condiment station. The elderly woman, one of their regular customers who always arrived precisely at 7:15, smiled warmly at him. "Good morning to you too, Michael. You're looking happy today," she replied, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I am happy. Today is my 2-year work anniversary," Michael announced proudly, standing a little straighter in his crisp blue uniform shirt with the cafe logo stitched above the pocket. 2 years might not seem like much to some, but for Michael it represented a mountain of small victories and hard-won independence. Mrs. Chen's face lit up. "Well, congratulations, that certainly calls for celebration." She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a small wrapped chocolate. A little something sweet for a sweet soul. Michael accepted the gift with genuine delight, carefully tucking it into his pocket for later. These small interactions were what he loved most about his job, the connections he made, the way regular customers like Mrs. Chen treated him like family. Across the cafe, Lisa, the manager, watched the exchange. With a smile, she'd hired Michael despite the concerns of the previous owner who worried about complications. But Lisa had stood firm. In the 2 years since, Michael had proven himself to be one of their most reliable employees, never missing a day, always eager to learn new tasks and bringing a kind of warmth to the place that customers noticed and appreciated. "Hey, Michael," Lisa called, walking over with a set of keys jingling in her hand. "Think you can handle the front counter today? Tommy called in sick." Michael's eyes widened, and his smile grew even broader. He'd been trained on the register, but usually only got to use it during the quieter afternoon shifts. Morning rush was considered the most challenging time, and being asked to cover it was a big vote of confidence. "Yes, I can do it," he nodded vigorously, already moving toward the counter with purpose in his steps. Lisa smiled at his enthusiasm as she handed him the keys to the register. "Remember, there's no rush. If you need help, just wave, and one of us will come over." She patted his shoulder gently before turning to help another staff member who was struggling with the espresso machine. Michael ran his hand over the smooth surface of the counter, feeling a surge of pride. His mom wouldn't believe it when he told her tonight. She'd been so worried when he first started looking for jobs, sitting with him through dozens of interviews where potential employers couldn't see past his condition to recognize his abilities. The day Lisa had called with the job offer, his mom had cried happy tears, and Michael had promised her he would work harder than anyone else to prove Lisa right. As he settled behind the register, Michael went through the morning setup checklist that Lisa had created specially for him, with clear steps and little drawings that made the process easier to remember. Receipt paper loaded, check. Drawer counted, check. Menu screen on and ready, check. He mouthed each item to himself, taking comfort in the familiar routine. The first real customers began to trickle in around 7:30. A group of nurses finishing their night shift at the hospital down the street, a couple of college students with laptops and tired eyes, and a handful of office workers grabbing coffee to go. Michael greeted each one with the same warm smile and genuine interest. "How was work?" he asked one of the nurses, a kind-faced woman who often took time to chat with him. "Busy but good. We had a baby born at 3 a.m., she replied, stifling a yawn. Wow, a new little person. Michael's eyes lit up at the news. That's amazing. Coffee is on me today, he decided impulsively, reaching into his own pocket for his wallet. The nurse shook her head with a smile. That's very sweet, Michael, but please don't. Your friendship is gift enough. She leaned in a bit. Besides, I think Lisa might not be happy if you start giving away free coffee to all your friends. Michael considered this, then nodded seriously. You're right. I'll make you the best coffee instead. That's free. And he did, taking extra care with the latte art, managing a wobbly but recognizable heart shape in the foam. When he handed it to her with a flourish, her genuine delight made his chest swell with pride. By 8 o'clock, the cafe had settled into its morning rhythm. The tables were filling up but not yet crowded. Michael was handling the register with confidence only, occasionally needing to call over Anna, another staff member, when a particularly complicated order came through. His system of repeating each order back to the customer not only helped him remember, but also reduced mistakes, something Lisa had pointed out during his last performance review. At the corner table near the window, a man sat quietly, nursing a black coffee. He'd slipped in without much notice, his casual attire, jeans, a simple black jacket, and a beanie pulled low, designed to blend rather than stand out. His long, dark hair framed a face that might have been instantly recognizable in other circumstances. But here, in the soft morning light of a neighborhood cafe, he was just another customer enjoying a peaceful start to the day. Michael had noticed. Him, of course. Michael noticed everyone. But unlike some customers who expected constant attention, this man seemed content to sit quietly, alternating between watching the world outside the window and reading a well-worn paperback book he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. There was something about him that felt familiar to Michael, but he couldn't quite place it, and he was too busy with the growing line of customers to give it much thought. What Michael didn't know was that the quiet man in the corner was Keanu Reeves, in town for filming and seeking a moment of normalcy away from the set. Keanu had chosen this cafe precisely because it wasn't the kind of trendy spot where celebrities were expected to be seen. Here, he could just be a person enjoying his coffee, observing the small but meaningful interactions that made up everyday life. And he had been watching Michael. Not in any intrusive way, but with quiet admiration for the young man's evident joy in his work and the gentle patience he showed each customer. In his years of fame, Keanu had developed an eye for genuine people, and there was something refreshingly authentic about the way Michael approached his job, not as a duty to be endured, but as an opportunity to connect. As the morning progressed, Michael found his rhythm, greeting customers, taking orders, and making change with increasing confidence. Each successful transaction added to his sense of accomplishment. Even when he made a small mistake, giving a customer too much change, he handled it with grace, apologizing sincerely and correcting the error without becoming flustered. Lisa, watching from the espresso station, felt a swell of pride. The nervous young man who had started 2 years ago, hands shaking as he tried to balance trays of dishes, had grown into a capable employee who brought something special to their little cafe. Something money couldn't buy and training couldn't instill. A genuine warmth that made people feel welcome. What none of them knew was that this ordinary Tuesday was about to become anything but ordinary. The peaceful morning was about to be disrupted by an encounter that would test Michael's newfound confidence, reveal the true character of their quiet corner customer, and remind everyone in Riverside Cafe about the power of kindness and standing up for others. But for now, in this quiet moment before the storm, Michael continued to serve customers with his wide smile. The sun continued to warm the wooden floors, and Keanu Reeves continued to observe it all from his corner table, finding a rare moment of peace in the simple pleasure of being unrecognized and watching humanity unfold around him in all its beautiful, ordinary glory. I've expanded part 1 of the story into a detailed narrative of about 1,400 words, as requested. The expanded version uses simple, natural language that flows conversationally, avoids headings and maintains a storytelling format, creates an engaging atmosphere with sensory details about the cafe, develops Michael's character in a respectful, human-centric way, establishes Keanu Reeves' presence without initially revealing his identity to Michael, builds anticipation for what's to come in the following parts, avoids names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, or Jamal, maintains content appropriate for YouTube policies. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this expanded version? I could modify the tone, pacing, or focus on different elements if you prefer. I'll expand part 2 of the story into a detailed narrative of about 1,400 words focusing on the unexpected celebrity. I'll keep the writing engaging, use simple English. With a natural tone, make it human-centric, and avoid any content that could violate YouTube policies. I'll also avoid the names you mentioned. The man in the corner had been sitting there for nearly an hour now, though few had taken much notice of him. There was something about the way he positioned himself, angled slightly away from the center of the cafe, his long, dark hair falling forward to partially shield his face, that seemed designed to deflect attention rather than attract it. He wore simple clothes, well-worn jeans, a plain black jacket that had seen better days, and sturdy boots that spoke of practicality over fashion. Nothing about him screamed for attention, and that was exactly how Keanu Reeves preferred it. He took another sip of his coffee, now lukewarm, and turned a page in his dog-eared copy of The Brothers Karamazov. Keanu had been reading the same book for weeks now, stealing moments between takes on set, in quiet corners of cafes like this one, and late at night in his temporary apartment. The story's exploration of faith, doubt, and the complex bonds of family resonated with him, offering a welcome escape from the controlled chaos of his latest film project. Filming had begun 3 weeks ago, transforming parts of the city into elaborate set pieces. The schedule was grueling: early morning calls, late wraps, endless repetition of scenes until they felt just right. But Keanu had long ago learned the importance of finding pockets of normalcy amid the artificial world of filmmaking. These quiet mornings in local establishments where he could just be another person enjoying a moment of peace helped keep him grounded. He'd discovered Riverside Cafe quite by accident. After a particularly exhausting day on set, he'd decided to walk back to his apartment rather than take the production car, needing the fresh air and movement to clear his head. The small cafe with its warm lighting and unpretentious exterior had caught his eye. Something about it felt honest in a way that the trendy coffee spots frequented by the film crew did not. On his first visit, he'd been struck by the easy camaraderie between the staff and the regulars, the sense of community that seemed to flow as freely as the coffee. But what had really drawn him back was watching Michael, the young man with Down syndrome, who approached his work with a kind of joyful purpose that Keanu found both refreshing and humbling. Now, on his 4th visit in 2 weeks, Keanu found himself watching Michael again, impressed by how confidently the young man was handling the morning rush at the register. There was a genuineness to Michael's interactions with customers that felt increasingly rare in a world where so many exchanges were hurried and impersonal. Each person who approached the counter received not just their order but a moment of true human connection. A soft smile crossed Keanu's face as he observed Michael carefully counting change back to an elderly man, explaining each bill and coin as he placed them in the customer's palm. The old man was in no hurry, nodding appreciatively at Michael's thoroughness, and Keanu was struck by how this small moment of patience created a tiny island of calm in the bustling cafe. In his decades in Hollywood, Keanu had seen how fame could distort perceptions, creating a barrier between himself and the everyday world. People either treated him with exaggerated deference or approached with an entitled familiarity, both reactions stemming from the idea of Keanu Reeves rather than the actual person sitting before them. Here, in this unassuming cafe where he was just another customer, he could observe these small, beautiful moments of humanity without the filter of celebrity changing the experience. He shifted slightly in his chair, stretching legs that still ached from yesterday's stunt work. At 50-something, his body didn't bounce back as quickly as it once had, though he still insisted on doing many of his own stunts. His current role as a former assassin seeking redemption was physically demanding, requiring hours of fight choreography and weapons training. The bruise blooming on his forearm beneath his jacket sleeve was a testament to that, a souvenir from a particularly challenging scene they'd finally nailed yesterday. A burst of laughter drew his attention to a nearby table where a group of college students were showing each other something on their phones. One of them glanced his way, then did a quick double-take before whispering urgently to her friends. Keanu tensed slightly, recognizing the familiar signs of recognition beginning to ripple through the group. He pulled his beanie a little lower, focusing intently on his book, hoping the universal signal of "I'm busy reading" would discourage approach. To his relief, the students seemed content to steal occasional glances and whisper among themselves, rather than interrupt his morning. This was another reason he'd come to appreciate this cafe. The customers tended to be respectful of each other's space. In Los Angeles, he would have already been asked for several selfies by now. Lisa, the cafe manager who Keanu had observed was both firm and kind with her staff, walked past his table with a fresh pot of coffee. She paused, gesturing with the pot in silent offering. Keanu nodded gratefully, pushing his mug toward her. "Enjoying the book?" she asked quietly as she poured, nodding toward the worn paperback in his hands. "Very much," he replied, his voice low and measured. "It's my third time reading it. I find something new each time." Lisa smiled, seemingly unaware, or perhaps politely pretending to be unaware, of who she was serving. "That's the mark of a good book, isn't it? Like visiting an old friend who always has a new story to tell." Keanu looked up at her, pleasantly surprised by the insight. "Exactly that," he agreed, warmth creeping into his tone. As Lisa moved on to the next table, Keanu found himself appreciating the simple interaction. No mention of films or fame, just one reader to another, sharing a moment of connection over literature. These were the kinds of exchanges he treasured, ones based on genuine shared humanity rather than his public persona. His attention drifted back to Michael, who was now carefully arranging a display of pastries in the glass case beside the register. The young man's tongue poked slightly out of the corner of his mouth in concentration, as he ensured each item was perfectly aligned. The care he took with this seemingly small task spoke volumes about his character. Keanu had always been drawn to people who found meaning in their work, regardless of what that work might be. In his own career, he'd strive to bring that same level of care and attention to every role, whether it was a blockbuster action film or a small independent project. Watching Michael, he was reminded that dignity wasn't in what you did, but how you did it. The door to the cafe opened, bringing with it a gust of cool morning air and the sound of street traffic. A woman entered carrying a portfolio case and looking slightly harried. She approached the counter where Michael greeted her with his characteristic warmth. "Good morning. Welcome to Riverside Cafe," Michael said, his smile genuine and open. The woman's tense expression softened visibly at his greeting. "Good morning. Could I get a large chai latte, please, and maybe something sweet? I've got a tough client meeting ahead." Michael nodded sympathetically. "Meetings can be scary, but you look very professional and smart. I think you'll do great." He pointed to the pastry case. "Our blueberry scones are baked fresh this morning. They're my favorite." The woman laughed, a surprised sound that seemed to release some of her anxiety. "You know what? You've convinced me. A scone it is." As Michael carefully selected what he clearly considered the best scone from the display, Keanu observed the subtle transformation in the woman's demeanor. Shoulders lowering from their tense position near her ears, the worried crease between her brows smoothing out. In his own quiet corner, Keanu smiled to himself. This was what he'd been trying to articulate to a somewhat skeptical director just yesterday, that the most powerful moments on screen were often not the dramatic fight sequences or special effects, but these small human exchanges that could shift the entire emotional landscape in seconds. The cafe had grown busier now as the morning progressed, with more tables filling and a steady line at the counter. A mix of people filled the space. Office workers clutching laptops, an artist sketching in a corner booth, a pair of nurses still in scrubs likely finishing a night shift, and a few elderly regulars who seemed content to watch the world go by, over their morning coffee. The diversity of the clientele was another aspect of the cafe that appealed to Keanu, a true cross-section of the city rather than the industry-heavy crowds he often found himself among. He checked his watch, realizing he should probably head to set soon. Today's scenes were emotionally charged rather than physically demanding, his character confronting painful truths about his past, and he wanted time to settle into that mental space before cameras rolled. Yet he found himself reluctant to leave the cafe's warm atmosphere, to trade this authentic environment for the constructed reality of the film set, however passionate he might be about the project. Just as he was about to close his book and gather his things, a new customer entered the cafe. The man's entrance was notable for its contrast to the cafe's relaxed vibe. He pushed through the door with an impatient force, already barking orders into a phone pressed to his ear. His expensive suit and polished shoes marked him as someone accustomed to projecting importance. "No, I need those numbers by noon, not end of day," the man was saying, his voice cutting through the cafe's pleasant hum of conversation. "I don't care if the Tokyo office is closed. Figure it out." Something in the man's dismissive tone caught Keanu's attention, making him pause with his book half closed. He watched as the businessman ended his call and approached the counter where Michael waited with his unfailing smile, completely unaware that the peaceful morning at Riverside Cafe was about to take an unexpected turn. I've expanded part 2 of the story to about 1,400 words, focusing on Keanu Reeves's perspective and setting the stage for the upcoming conflict. The narrative provides insight into Keanu's character and why he values the cafe's atmosphere, uses simple, accessible language while maintaining an engaging storytelling style, creates a rich, relatable environment through sensory details and observations, builds natural tension toward the end as the businessman enters, avoids any potentially problematic content for YouTube, maintains a human-centric approach that feels naturally written, avoids the specific names you mentioned, ends with a hook that leads naturally into part 3 where the incident will occur. The expansion gives readers a deeper understanding of Keanu's character and his appreciation for authentic human connections, making his later intervention more meaningful. The narrative builds anticipation for the confrontation while maintaining a warm, accessible tone throughout. Would you like me to adjust anything about this expanded section before moving on to part 3? I'll expand part 3 of the story into a detailed narrative of about 1,400 words, focusing on the incident. I'll keep the language simple and natural, make it engaging and human-centric, and avoid any content that could violate YouTube policies or feel AI-generated. I'll also avoid using the names you mentioned. The businessman strode toward the counter, his expensive leather shoes clicking sharply against the wooden floor of Riverside Cafe. Everything about him radiated importance and impatience, from his perfectly tailored gray suit to the way he continually checked his watch, as if every second spent waiting was personally offensive to him. His phone, barely tucked into his jacket pocket, buzzed again, but he ignored it, his attention now focused on getting his order as quickly as possible. Michael, who had been arranging a fresh batch of muffins in the display case, looked up with his usual bright smile. The morning had been going wonderfully so far. Lisa had trusted him with the register during the busy period, and he hadn't made a single mistake with the cash. Every small victory like this built his confidence, reinforcing what his mom always told him, that he was capable of far more than some people might think. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Riverside Cafe," Michael greeted cheerfully. "What can I get for you today?" The businessman barely glanced at Michael, his eyes fixed on the menu board above. "Double espresso, to go, and make it quick." His voice had the clipped tone of someone used to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. "Yes, sir. 1 double espresso coming up," Michael responded, undeterred by the man's brusque manner. He'd encountered all types of customers in his 2 years at the cafe, and prided himself on treating everyone with the same friendly service. "Would you like to try one of our muffins? They're fresh from the oven. The blueberry ones are really good." The businessman sighed heavily, as if Michael's friendly suggestion was an unbearable burden. "Just the espresso." Michael nodded, turning to the register. This was the part that sometimes took him a bit longer than the other staff. The buttons were small, and occasionally his fingers didn't hit exactly the right spot. But Lisa had worked with him to develop a method. First enter the item, then check the screen to make sure it appeared correctly, then move to the next step. "That will be $3.75, please," Michael said after carefully entering the order. He looked up expectantly, waiting for payment. The businessman thrust a credit card toward him. Michael took it carefully, remembering to hold it by the edges as he'd been taught. The card machine was sometimes tricky, but he'd been practicing. He inserted the card into the reader and waited for the screen to light up with instructions. But today the machine seemed to be working more slowly than usual. The processing message blinked on the screen for what felt like an unusually long time. "Come on," the businessman muttered, checking his watch again. "I don't have all day." "I'm sorry, sir. The machine is being a little slow today," Michael explained, his smile faltering slightly under the man's impatient stare. "Is there a problem?" The businessman's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby customers. Michael felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in his chest. "No problem, sir. It's just taking a moment to—" As if on cue, the machine beeped and displayed an error message. "Card not read. Please try again." "I'm sorry, sir." "Could you please try again?" Michael asked, his voice now slightly less confident, as he handed the card back. The businessman snatched his card, making no effort to hide his growing frustration. "Unbelievable," he muttered, loud enough for Michael and several nearby customers to hear. In the corner, Keanu Reeves looked up from his book, his attention caught by the tension building at the counter. He watched as Michael's shoulders hunched slightly, the young man's earlier confidence visibly diminishing under the businessman's harsh gaze. Keanu set his book down, sensing that something was about to happen. The businessman reinserted his card with unnecessary force. This time, the machine seemed to accept it, blinking its approval as it processed the payment. "Thank you, sir. Your espresso will be ready in just a minute," Michael said, attempting to regain his positive demeanor. He turned toward the espresso machine, but in his nervousness, his elbow knocked against a stack of to-go cups, sending them tumbling to the floor. The clatter seemed to echo through the cafe. Michael's face flushed red with embarrassment as he immediately bent down to gather the scattered cups. "For God's sake," the businessman snapped, no longer attempting to hide his irritation. "Is there anyone else who can make my coffee? Someone competent?" The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Michael froze, still kneeling on the floor, cups clutched tightly in his trembling hands. The cafe had grown unusually quiet, other customers watching the scene with uncomfortable expressions. Lisa, who had been in the back checking inventory, emerged at the sound of the commotion. She quickly assessed the situation, her protective instinct flaring at the sight of Michael's distress. But before she could intervene, the businessman leaned over the counter, looking down at Michael with undisguised contempt. "Are you stupid?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Get someone who actually knows what they're doing." Michael's eyes widened at the harsh words. In 2 years at the cafe, he'd dealt with impatient customers, had made mistakes, and had occasionally faced subtle expressions of discomfort from people who didn't know how to interact with someone with Down syndrome. But never had anyone been so openly cruel. He slowly rose to his feet, the cup still clutched against his chest like a shield. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice small and shaking. "I can make your espresso, I know how." "Look," the businessman continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension his words had created in the cafe. "I understand you people need jobs too, but maybe not ones where efficiency actually matters." A collective intake of breath swept through the cafe at the blatant cruelty of the statement. Anna, another barista who had been cleaning tables nearby, hurried toward the counter, her face flushed with anger. Several regular customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly troubled by what they were witnessing but unsure how to respond. Michael stood very still, his earlier joy completely evaporated. The words, "you people," echoed in his mind, a phrase he'd heard before in different contexts, always serving to separate him from others, to mark him as somehow less. His hands began to shake more visibly, and the cups he'd picked up clattered against each other. Lisa stepped forward, placing herself slightly between Michael and the businessman. "Sir," she began, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I'm going to have to ask you to—" "To what?" the businessman interrupted. "To accept incompetence? I'm a paying customer and I expect basic service." He gestured dismissively toward Michael. "If he can't handle a simple coffee order, then maybe he shouldn't be working here." Michael's eyes filled with tears, but he fought to hold them back. His mother had always told him to be proud of who he was, that his condition didn't define him. He'd believed her, especially during these past 2 years at the cafe where his colleagues treated him with respect and customers greeted him by name. But in this moment, under the harsh glare of the businessman, all that hard-won confidence seemed to crumble. "I can do this job," Michael said, his voice barely audible. "I just need a little more time sometimes." The businessman rolled his eyes. "Time is money, kid, and you're wasting mine." He turned to Lisa. "Is this how you run a business? Hiring people who can't do the basic functions of their job?" Lisa's face hardened. "Sir, Michael is one of our most valued employees and I won't have you speaking to him that way. If you can't treat our staff with basic human decency, then I'm afraid we can't serve you." "Are you serious?" The businessman laughed incredulously. "You're refusing service to me because I pointed out the obvious? That's discrimination against customers and I could sue this place." The threat hung in the air, causing Lisa's resolve to falter slightly. The cafe was her livelihood, and while she wanted nothing more than to throw this man out, the reality of a potential lawsuit was concerning. Michael sensed her hesitation and felt a fresh wave of shame wash over him. He was causing problems, for Lisa now, all because he couldn't handle a simple transaction without making mistakes. "I'll go to the back," Michael whispered to Lisa, placing the cups on the counter with shaking hands. "Someone else can make his coffee." "No, Michael, you don't have to," Lisa began, but Michael was already backing away, his eyes downcast. The businessman smirked, clearly viewing this as a victory. "Finally, some sense now about my espresso. I believe the lady asked you to leave." The new voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension like a knife. Every head in the cafe turned toward the source, the quiet man in the corner who was now standing, his book set aside on the table. Without his hunched posture and with his face fully visible, several people in the cafe gasped in recognition. Keanu Reeves stepped forward, moving with deliberate calm toward the counter. His face held no anger, no dramatic emotion, yet there was something in his steady gaze that commanded attention. He stopped a few feet from the businessman, whose expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to stunned disbelief as he recognized the actor. The cafe had fallen completely silent now, the earlier tension transformed into a different kind of anticipation. Michael, who had been backing toward the kitchen door, paused, his tear-filled eyes now wide with surprise as he recognized the familiar face he'd seen countless times on movie posters and TV screens. No one spoke. No one moved. The next moments would change everything at Riverside Cafe, creating a story that would spread far beyond its walls, a reminder that sometimes heroes appear in the most unexpected places, and that kindness, when it matters most, can come from the most surprising sources. I've expanded part 3 of the story to about 1,400 words, focusing on the confrontation between the businessman and Michael, building tension throughout the scene. The narrative creates a realistic and emotionally charged incident that feels authentic rather than manufactured, uses simple, accessible language while maintaining an engaging storytelling flow, develops Michael's character sympathetically, without being overly sentimental, portrays the businessman's cruelty in a way that's impactful but not excessively offensive for YouTube, builds natural tension leading to Keanu's intervention at the perfect moment, avoids any potentially problematic content for YouTube policies, maintains a human-centric approach with natural dialogue and reactions, avoids the specific names you mentioned, ends with a powerful cliffhanger that leads directly into part 4. The expanded narrative gives readers a deeper emotional connection to the situation and heightens the anticipation for Keanu's intervention in the next part. The scene feels realistic and grounded while building to a dramatic turning point. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this expanded section before we move on to part 4? I'll expand part 4 of the story into a detailed narrative of about 1,400 words focusing on Keanu's intervention. I'll use simple English with a natural tone, make it engaging and human-centric, and avoid any content that could violate YouTube policies or feel AI-generated. I'll also avoid the names you mentioned. Time seemed to stand still in Riverside Cafe. The businessman blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to process the sudden shift in the situation. One moment he had been asserting his dominance over a cafe worker he deemed incompetent, and the next, he found himself face to face with one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars. Keanu Reeves stood just a few feet away, his posture relaxed, but purposeful. Gone was the hunched figure from the corner table, replaced by a man whose quiet presence somehow filled the room without any need for theatrics. He hadn't raised his voice when he spoke, yet his words had cut through the cafe's tension with perfect clarity. "I believe the lady asked you to leave." The businessman's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, his earlier arrogance evaporating under Keanu's steady gaze. A few patrons pulled out their phones discreetly, though whether to document the unfolding scene or simply to confirm that yes, this really was Keanu Reeves standing in their local cafe, it wasn't clear. Michael remained frozen behind the counter, his eyes wide with disbelief. The tears that had been threatening to fall now hung suspended, momentarily forgotten in his shock at seeing the famous actor stepping into the situation. Keanu moved forward, positioning himself beside Michael at the counter. His movement was casual but deliberate, creating a visual statement of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone watching. He placed a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder, the gesture simple but powerfully reassuring. "I've been sitting over there all morning," Keanu said, his voice still calm but carrying a quiet intensity that held everyone's attention. He gestured toward his corner table with his free hand, watching everyone work. "And I've got to say, this young man has been nothing short of amazing." Michael's face flushed, but this time with something different than embarrassment. The warmth of both the unexpected praise and the supportive hand on his shoulder seemed to steady him. His trembling began to subside. "The care he's shown every customer," Keanu continued. "The way he remembers the regulars' orders, the genuine smile he offers everyone who walks through that door. That's not something you can fake." He paused, his eyes never leaving the businessman's increasingly uncomfortable face. "That's the kind of authentic human connection that makes a place like this special." The cafe remained hushed, everyone present understanding they were witnessing something extraordinary. Lisa stood nearby, her earlier tension now replaced with a look of quiet amazement. The businessman cleared his throat, attempting to regain some composure. "Mr. Reeves, I'm a huge fan of your work," he began, his tone suddenly deferential. "I didn't mean any—" "Patience and respect," Keanu interrupted gently. "They cost nothing." His hand remained supportively on Michael's shoulder. "But their absence says everything about a person's character." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Several customers nodded in quiet agreement. An older woman at a nearby table wiped away a tear. The businessman's face flushed deep red as the full impact of the public rebuke sank in. Being called out for cruelty was humiliating enough. Having it done by Keanu Reeves in a cafe full of witnesses took the humiliation to an entirely different level. I was just in a hurry," he stammered, his earlier bravado completely deflated. "I didn't mean to." "We're all in a hurry sometimes," Keanu replied, his tone neither accusatory nor angry, just matter of fact. "But that's never an excuse for making someone else feel small." He turned slightly to look at Michael, his expression warming. "Especially someone who brings so much joy to others." Michael looked up at Keanu, a tentative smile beginning to form on his face. The unexpected defense from someone he'd only ever seen on movie screens felt almost dreamlike, yet the steady hand on his shoulder was undeniably real. The businessman shifted uncomfortably, clearly searching for a way to extract himself from the situation with some dignity and tact. "I apologize if I came across as rude," he said finally, though the words sounded hollow, more concerned with saving face than expressing genuine remorse. Keanu didn't acknowledge the half-hearted apology. Instead, he turned to Michael fully. "Could I trouble you for a cup of coffee? The one I have has gone cold and I've heard your espresso is excellent." It was a simple request, but the meaning behind it was clear to everyone watching. Keanu was demonstrating his confidence in Michael's abilities, directly contradicting the businessman's cruel dismissal. Michael straightened his shoulders, his earlier confidence slowly returning. "Yes, sir. I'd be happy to make that for you. Would you like a double espresso like this gentleman or something different?" Keanu smiled, the kind of genuine smile rarely seen in his film roles. "A regular coffee would be perfect. Black, please." Michael nodded and turned toward the coffee machines with renewed purpose. His hand still shook slightly, but there was determination in his movements now. The businessman, sensing that his moment to salvage the situation had passed, muttered something about another appointment and backed away from the counter, leaving his own unfinished order behind. No one tried to stop him as he hurried toward the door, nearly tripping over his own feet in his eagerness to escape the humiliating scene. The bell above the door jingled as he left, the sound oddly cheerful in contrast to the tension that had preceded it. As the door closed behind the businessman, a collective breath seemed to be released throughout the cafe. The atmosphere, which had been charged with tension, gradually began to lighten. A few patrons exchanged glances, small smiles breaking out as they processed what they had just witnessed. Lisa stepped forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said simply to Keanu, her voice thick with emotion. "What you just did, I don't even know how to—" Keanu shook his head slightly. "No need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Lisa replied softly. "You did." Behind the counter, Michael worked with careful concentration, determined to make the perfect cup of coffee. His earlier shame had been replaced by a sense of purpose, bolstered by the unexpected support from the famous actor, who had somehow seen value in him that the businessman had missed entirely. As Michael focused on his task, Keanu turned to address the other customers in the cafe who were still watching with undisguised interest. "I'd appreciate it if we could keep this morning between us," he said, his tone friendly but with an underlying seriousness. "I'm in town filming, and I've really enjoyed the quiet mornings here." There were nods of understanding around the cafe. A young woman who had been openly recording the scene on her phone slowly lowered it, looking slightly embarrassed. An older gentleman gave Keanu a thumbs up. "Your secret's safe with us, son," he called from his table by the window. Keanu smiled, in gratitude before turning back to the counter, where Michael was now approaching with a steaming mug of coffee. The young man's hands were steady now as he carefully placed the mug on the counter. "Here you go, sir," Michael said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I made it fresh." Keanu accepted the coffee with both hands, the gesture somehow reverent. He took a deliberate sip, his expression thoughtful. "This," he said after a moment, "is exactly what I needed." "Thank you, Michael." Michael's eyes widened. "You know my name?" "Of course," Keanu replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a Hollywood star to know the name of a cafe worker. "I've heard the regulars call you that." He paused, taking another appreciative sip of the coffee. "Would you mind if I sat at the counter for a while? If you're not too busy, I'd enjoy the company." The request, so simple and yet so meaningful, brought a wide smile to Michael's face. "I'd like that very much," he replied, his earlier distress now completely forgotten. Lisa quickly cleared a spot at the counter, still looking slightly dazed by the turn of events. The other staff members, Anna and a young man named Tyler, who had emerged from the kitchen during the commotion, watched with a mixture of amazement and delight as Keanu settled onto a stool at the counter. "So 2 years working here, right?" Keanu asked conversationally as Michael resumed his position behind the register. "That's impressive. What do you enjoy most about it?" And just like that, a conversation began between the world-famous actor and the young man with Down syndrome, a conversation between equals characterized by genuine interest and respect on both sides. As they talked, the cafe gradually returned to its normal rhythm. though there was an undercurrent of excitement that hadn't been there before. Customers who came in after the incident remained unaware of the drama that had unfolded earlier, seeing only a friendly conversation between a cafe worker and a customer who looked remarkably like Keanu Reeves. Only those who had witnessed the confrontation understood the true significance of the scene, how a quiet act of kindness had transformed what could have been a crushing moment of humiliation into something altogether different. As the morning progressed, those who had been present found themselves repeatedly glancing toward the counter, where Michael was now animatedly describing his collection of action figures to an attentive Keanu. There was something almost magical about witnessing the easy rapport between the two men, a reminder that beneath the superficial differences that so often divided people, there existed the possibility of genuine human connection. And in a world that so frequently rewarded loudness and aggression, there was something profoundly moving about seeing quieter values, kindness, patience, respect, championed by someone with the power to be heard. Not through grand gestures or public statements, but through a simple, human moment in a neighborhood cafe on what had begun as just another ordinary day. I've expanded part 4 of the story to about 1,400 words, focusing on Keanu's intervention and its impact. The narrative creates a powerful but realistic confrontation where Keanu stands up for Michael with quiet dignity, uses simple, accessible language while maintaining an engaging storytelling flow, avoids over-dramatizing the scene while still making it emotionally impactful, shows the businessman's humiliation without making it gratuitous, portrays the developing connection between Keanu and Michael in a genuine, respectful way, avoids any potentially problematic content for YouTube, policies, maintains a human-centric approach with natural dialogue and reactions, avoids the specific names you mentioned, ends with a thoughtful observation about the power of small acts of kindness. The expanded narrative gives readers a satisfying resolution to the conflict, while setting up the deeper connection between Keanu and Michael that will be explored in Part 5. The scene feels genuine and emotionally resonant without being overly sentimental. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this expanded section before we move on to the final part? I'll expand Part 5 of the story into a detailed narrative of about 1,400 words focusing on the aftermath. I'll use simple English with a natural tone, make it engaging and human-centric, and avoid any content that could violate YouTube policies or feel AI-generated. I'll also avoid the names you mentioned. The morning drifted into afternoon at Riverside Cafe, the hands of the clock moving steadily forward, while something extraordinary continued to unfold at the counter. Keanu had now been talking with Michael for over an hour, their conversation flowing with a natural ease that made it hard to believe they had met only that morning. They had covered Michael's favorite movies, including, much to Keanu's amusement, several of his own. Michael's dream of one day going to comic book conventions and his hope to eventually move into his own apartment. "My mom worries about me living alone," Michael explained, arranging napkins into neat stacks as they talked. "She says I can do it, but I think she's scared something might happen when she's not there." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Parents always worry, it's how they show love." "Did your parents worry about you?" Michael asked, his directness one of the qualities that had immediately drawn Keanu to him. "All the time," Keanu replied with a soft laugh. "Especially when I said I wanted to be an actor instead of finishing school. My mom was sure I'd end up broke and hungry." Michael's eyes widened. "But you're famous and probably very rich," he added with the candid honesty that sometimes made Lisa gently remind him about appropriate topics of conversation. But Keanu just smiled. "Now I am. But I wasn't then. I was just a kid with a dream that seemed impossible to most people." He took a sip of his third cup of coffee. "The point is, your mom believing in you while still being scared for you, that's exactly how it should be. The people who love us most are always a little afraid for us." Michael considered this, nodding slowly. "I never thought about it like that." From her position near the pastry case, Lisa watched the ongoing interaction with a sense of wonder. The morning's ugly incident had transformed into something nobody could have anticipated. Not just a celebrity sighting, but a genuine connection between two people who, on the surface, couldn't have seemed more different. The cafe had been unusually busy since word had somehow spread that Keanu Reeves was there. Lisa suspected the college students who had left shortly after the confrontation might have shared the news, despite Keanu's request for privacy. New customers had been arriving steadily, ordering coffee and pastries while trying not to stare, too obviously, at the famous actor sitting at the counter. To his credit, Keanu seemed either unaware of or unbothered by the increased attention, his focus remaining entirely on his conversation with Michael. Occasionally, he would acknowledge other customers with a polite nod, but he made no move to leave his spot at the counter. The bell above the door jingled again as a middle-aged woman entered, her face flushed as if she had been hurrying. Her eyes scanned the cafe anxiously before landing on Michael behind the counter. Relief washed over her features. "Mom," Michael called out, waving enthusiastically. "What are you doing here? I don't get off work for another 2 hours." The woman approached the counter, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "I got a call from your friend Tyler," she explained, gesturing toward the kitchen where the young cook was visible through the service window. "He said something happened this morning and I should come check on you." Her eyes finally registered the man sitting at the counter and she froze, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. Michael beamed, seemingly untroubled by the mention of the morning's incident. "Mom, this is my new friend Keanu. He helped me when a man was being really mean, and now we're talking about movies and stuff." Keanu stood, extending his hand to Michael's mother. "It's a pleasure to meet you. You've raised an extraordinary young man." Michael's mother shook Keanu's hand automatically, still looking stunned. Thank you. I mean, you." She stopped, took a deep breath, and started again. "Thank you for whatever you did to help my son." Lisa stepped forward then, gently touching Michael's mother's arm. "Why don't you sit down and I'll explain what happened," she suggested. "Michael's fine, better than fine, actually, but I understand why Tyler was concerned." As Lisa led Michael's mother to a nearby table, Michael turned back to Keanu. "My mom's going to be so excited when she understands who you are. She loves your movies too. We watched that one where you know Kung Fu together like 5 times. Keanu laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Maybe we should take a picture for her before I go. I need to head to set soon." Michael's face lit up. "Really? She would love that." Then his expression faltered slightly. "You're leaving?" "I have to," Keanu replied, genuine regret in his voice. "We're filming some important scenes this afternoon." He checked his watch. "Actually, I should be going now, but I've really enjoyed talking with you, Michael." Michael nodded, trying not to look too disappointed. "It was the best morning ever," he said simply. "Even with that mean man." At the nearby table, Lisa had finished explaining the morning's events to Michael's mother, whose eyes were now glistening with tears as she looked over at her son and the actor. "I still can't believe it," she said softly. "All these years of worrying about him, about how people might treat him, and then Keanu Reeves, of all people, steps in and stands up for him." She shook her head in wonder. "It's like something from a movie." Lisa smiled. "The really amazing part is what happened after. He's been sitting there talking to Michael for over an hour now, just like he was any other customer. No airs, no rush to leave, just genuine interest in what Michael has to say." Michael's mother wiped away a tear. "That's all I've ever wanted for him. Just to be treated like a person, not a condition." Over at the counter, Keanu was writing something on a napkin. He folded it carefully and handed it to Michael. "This is my personal email," he explained. "Not the one my assistant checks, my actual email. I'd like to hear how you're doing, especially when you start looking for that apartment." Michael stared at the napkin in his hands as if it were made of gold. "You want me to write to you? For real?" "For real," Keanu confirmed with a nod. "Just don't share it with anyone else, okay? It would be nice to keep in touch." Michael carefully tucked the napkin into his pocket, his face solemn with the responsibility of keeping this precious secret. "I promise I won't tell anyone except my mom." "Your mom is fine," Keanu assured him with a smile. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a few bills, placing them under his empty coffee mug. for the coffee, and a little extra for the excellent service. Michael shook his head firmly. No, the coffee is free, for helping me. Keanu considered this for a moment, then nodded in understanding of the importance of this gesture to Michael. Thank you. That's very kind. He stood, gathering his book from the counter where Lisa had retrieved it from his original table. But I'm still leaving the tip. That's for you being great at your job, which has nothing to do with what happened with that guy. Michael's smile returned full force. Okay then. Thank you. As Keanu prepared to leave, Michael's mother approached, having composed herself. Mr. Reeves, she began, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you for what you did today. Keanu shook his head slightly. There's no need. Your son is a remarkable person. I'm glad I had the chance to meet him. He glanced at his watch again. I really should go, but... He looked at Michael. How about that photo first? The next few minutes were a flurry of excitement as Anna volunteered to take the picture using Michael's mother's phone. Michael stood proudly between his mother and Keanu, his smile wider than anyone had ever seen it. This is going in a frame on our wall, his mother declared as she examined the photo afterward, her voice still tinged with disbelief. With final goodbyes and a promise from Michael to email soon, Keanu finally left the cafe, pulling his beanie low as he stepped onto the sidewalk. Through the window they watched him walk away, just another person on a busy street, though they now knew he was anything but ordinary. 6 months later, Riverside Cafe had changed in subtle but significant ways. A new sign hung by the entrance. Everyone deserves respect, no exceptions. The sign had appeared shortly after an anonymous donation had funded what Lisa called their Workplace Respect Initiative, though everyone suspected the source of both the donation and the initiative's inspiration. The most notable change, however, was in Michael himself. The incident that could have crushed his confidence had instead, through Keanu's intervention, become a source of strength. Regular customers noticed how he carried himself differently now, still friendly and warm, but with a quiet self-assurance that hadn't been there before. Michael, table 3 needs more napkins, Lisa called from the register one busy morning. It, boss? Michael replied with a quick nod. He wore a new name tag now, one that read, Michael Hernandez, Shift Supervisor. The promotion had come 3 months after what cafe staff now referred to simply as the Keanu morning. Michael had earned it through his continued dedication and growing confidence in taking on new responsibilities. As he restocked napkins, at table 3 an elderly customer smiled up at him. You're doing a wonderful job, young man. Thank you, Michael replied easily, no longer surprised by such compliments. Let me know if you need anything else. Back behind the counter, he glanced briefly at the bulletin board in the staff area, where among the schedules and announcements hung a small printed email. Lisa had insisted he bring it in after showing it to her with tears in his eyes. The email was from Keanu, sent in response to Michael's news about his promotion. It was brief, but meant the world to Michael. Congratulations on the promotion, Michael. Not surprised at all. Anyone who meets you knows you're capable of amazing things. Sometimes the most important people are the ones who notice when others are invisible. You've always seen people clearly. Now others are seeing you too. Keep in touch. Michael had read those words so many times he had them memorized. On difficult days they reminded him of what he had learned that morning 6 months ago. That kindness had power. That standing up for others mattered. And that sometimes the most unexpected people could change your life in the most unexpected ways. The story of that Tuesday morning had indeed created ripples of positive change, not just for Michael, but for everyone who heard it. And while Keanu had never publicly commented on the incident, preferring as always to let his actions speak louder than words, the lesson he had taught through a simple act of standing up for someone had become a powerful reminder that remained with all who witnessed it. I've expanded part 5 of the story to about 1,400 words, focusing on the aftermath of Keanu's intervention and its lasting impact. The narrative creates a meaningful conclusion that shows both the immediate and long-term effects of the incident, shows the genuine connection between Keanu and Michael continuing through their conversation, Introduces Michael's mother to add emotional depth and perspective. Uses simple, accessible language while maintaining an engaging storytelling flow. Includes the meaningful email exchange that reinforces the story's central message. Shows Michael's growth and increased confidence in the months following the incident. Avoids any potentially problematic content for YouTube policies. Maintains a human-centric approach with natural dialogue and reactions. Avoids the specific names you mentioned. Ends with a reflective conclusion about the lasting impact of kindness and standing up for others. The expanded narrative provides a satisfying conclusion to the story, while reinforcing its central themes about respect, kindness, and the unexpected, ways people can impact each other's lives. The tone remains warm and authentic throughout. Is there anything specific you'd like me to adjust or modify in this final part of the story?